Thank you, Mr. Mayor, and through you, we do have 5:36 and our live streaming is going and good to go. So if you'd like to start your meeting, Mr. Mayor, you may do so.
Okay, thank you, Madam Clerk. Good evening, Council, members of SLT. I see that we have quorum, so I now hereby call this meeting Monday, February 8th to order. And first up, we'll hear remarks from our clerk.
Thank you, Mr. Mayor. We're just sharing our screen. Just give us one moment. Thank you, Mr. Mayor. This is the public meeting under the Planning Act for Monday, February 8th, 2021 at 5:30. All Town of Pelham in-person public meetings have been canceled. Instead, the town is holding all meetings electronically via Zoom. Please note, no decisions have been made prior to this public meeting. The Planning Department will provide a presentation regarding the subject application. Participants are reminded, ensure your background is free from offensive or vulgar material. If inappropriate material is visible, you will be removed from the meeting. Vulgar or offensive language will not be tolerated. If inappropriate language is used, you will be removed from the meeting. Participant microphones and video cameras will remain off until they are called to speak. Once your comments have been heard by council, your microphone will be muted and staff will turn off your camera. Decorum. The public meeting under the Planning Act is a formal public hearing requiring decorum, meaning all comments are to be made through the chair. If you have pre-registered to speak, you will be given an opportunity to address council at the public portion of the meeting. If you are live streaming and wish to submit a comment live, please email clerks@pelham.ca. Please note, comments must be received during the public portion of the meeting. Otherwise, they will not be considered. Disrespectful comments will not be tolerated. Cheering, booing, or hissing from the gallery will not be tolerated. Please note, if decorum is lost, the meeting may be recessed and persons asked to leave. Public portion of the meeting. To allow for an efficient meeting, each member of the public will be given an opportunity to speak to council during the public portion of the meeting. Please note, after all members of the public have been given the opportunity to speak, the applicant/agent will have the opportunity to address the public comments or concerns at one time. Please note, all comments stated and received electronically form part of the public record and will be considered by planning staff when preparing the recommendation report for council's consideration. If you wish to receive a copy of the notice of decision, please contact the planner responsible for this application in writing as soon as possible. Tara O'Toole, Policy Planner, 20 Pelham Town Square, P.O. Box 400, Fonthill, Ontario, LOS 1E0. T. O'Toole at pelham.ca. This contact information can be found at the Town of Pelham's website. Through you, thank you, Mr. Mayor.
Okay, thank you, Madam Clerk. See, the next is the adoption of the agenda.
Through you, Mr. Mayor, thank you. I do have a motion put forth by Councillor Olson that the agenda be amended to include the addendum items being the addition of John and Jill Kappa, Patrick Mahoney, and Stephen Kaiser as pre-registered members of the public. The addition of Jessica and Evan Leung, Carol Jones, Mike and Mary Hughes, Tim Nohara, Todd Barber, and Annette Mastriacci, written correspondence. Is there any discussion?
Any questions on the amendment?
Seeing none, Mr. Mayor, I'll call for the vote. Starting with Councillor Hahn.
Yes.
Councillor Hildebrandt.
Yes.
Councillor Kaur.
Yes.
Councillor Olson. Councillor Olson, sorry, you're muted.
Yes.
Councillor Stewart.
Yes.
Councillor Wink.
Yes.
Mayor Junkin.
Yes.
And that motion carries. I do have a motion put forth by Councillor Olson that the agenda for the February 8th, 2021 public meeting under the Planning Act special meeting of the Committee of the Whole be adopted as amended.
Any discussion on that? Not seeing any, Madam Clerk.
Thank you, Mr. Mayor. For the vote, Councillor Hildebrandt.
Yes.
Councillor Kaur.
Yes.
Councillor Olson.
Yes.
Councillor Stewart.
Yes.
Councillor Wink.
Yes.
Councillor Hahn.
Yes.
Mayor Junkin.
Yes.
And that motion carries.
Thank you. Next on the agenda is the disclosure of pecuniary interest. After viewing the agenda, does any counselor have any such declarations to make? Not seeing any, Madam Clerk?
Thank you. I will so note. Thank you, Mr. Mayor. That does bring us to item number 4, and I do have notice requirements to read into the record. Notice requirements. Town of Pelham, official plan and zoning bylaw amendment, second dwelling units, file numbers OP-AM-01-2020 and AM-04-2020. Official plan and zoning bylaw amendments to permit second dwelling units in the town of Pelham. The Planning Act requires under Section 34 and 22 that council must hold at least one public meeting for the purpose of informing the public in respect of the proposed amendments. This public meeting has been called to satisfy this requirement. Notice of this meeting was published in the Voice of Pelham on January 13th, 2021. The notice provided information on the official plan and zoning bylaw amendments. In addition to providing information, we will also receive any comments which any member of the public may wish to offer. If you wish to receive a copy of the notice of decision, please contact the clerk in writing as soon as possible. Contact information is available on the town's website and will also be displayed on the last slide of the staff's presentation to follow shortly. In closing, we stress, at this point, no decisions have been made on the proposed amendments, and therefore, any comments received will be taken into account by council in their consideration. Thank you, Mr. Mayor. We do have Tara O'Toole, our policy planner, and I do understand that she has a PowerPoint presentation to share with council.
Ms. O'Toole, you have the floor.
Thank you, Mayor.
Ms. O'Toole will just share her screen to bring up her PowerPoint. Just give us one moment. We can see your PowerPoint. Thank you.
Good evening. Thank you for attending tonight's public meeting to receive information and provide input on the proposed second dwelling unit policies and regulations for the town. We will be providing a summary of the changes, followed by an opportunity for questions and comments. How did we get here? The Minister of Municipal Affairs and Housing introduced Bill 108, More Homes, More Choices Act on May 2nd, 2019. The bill proposed a number of amendments to 13 different statutes, including the Planning Act, the Local Planning Appeal Tribunal Act, and the Development Charges Act. The changes to the Planning Act require that municipal official plans and zoning bylaws must contain provisions permitting additional residential units, subject to applicable provisions in the Ontario Fire Code, Building Code, and municipal bylaws. Over the last few years, planning staff have received inquiries from the public regarding the establishment of second dwelling units, or what I'll refer to as SDUs, and the process required to build such a unit in their dwelling and our accessory building. The number of inquiries have grown considerably over the last few years, with staff fielding approximately 2 to 3 inquiries a month regarding the provincial changes and establishing an SDU on their property. This level of inquiry is indicative of a need for us to update the town official plan and zoning bylaw to address SDUs, or second dwelling units. A webpage dedicated to the SDU project has been posted on the Town of Pelham website. This webpage includes explanations of what is required of the town, why SDUs are needed, the planning process that's being undertaken, how to comment, graphics, and contact information. Following this public meeting, some revisions may be made to the drafts, and a recommendation report on final policies and regulations will be prepared for council with a date yet to be determined. The draft framework for the second dwelling units in the town consists of a draft official plan amendment and a draft zoning bylaw amendment, and I'm going to highlight the changes proposed by each one. At present, the official plan does not contain policies specific to second dwelling units, but allows for accessory apartments only in single detached dwellings and only in the College and Emmett Street neighborhood. However, the zoning bylaw has not been updated to conform to this policy. The draft proposes to permit a second dwelling unit in a principal dwelling unit and/or accessory structure subject to meeting specific policy requirements. Those policies include deleting and replacing accessory apartments through a number of sections in the official plan. The staff proposed changes will replace section B1.1.4 accessory apartments with second dwelling units throughout the section. These policies will be slightly amended to ensure that the floor area of the proposed unit will be less than the gross floor area of the principal residential unit. Also, a second dwelling unit will not contribute to density, but will be included in the town's intensification targets. The current official plan allows for accessory apartments in East Fonthill, low, medium, and mixed-use density residential, as well in the urban commercial highway. The proposed official plan amendment would replace accessory apartments with second dwelling units and continue to allow the permissions within the listed designations. Updating the language from accessory apartment to second dwelling units is consistent with the language used by the provincial government. Using consistent terminology will minimize confusion. The final amendment is to replace accessory apartments or secondary suites with second dwelling units in residential intensification definition. The draft zoning bylaw amendment. Currently, the zoning bylaw does not contain specific regulations permitting a second dwelling unit. The zoning bylaw amendment seeks approval to permit second dwelling units that are a self-contained dwelling unit with bathroom, kitchen, and sleeping facilities that are separate from those of the principal dwelling on the same lot. The amendment will permit an SDU in the agricultural zone, specialty rural zone, residential village 1 zone, residential 1 zone, and residential 2 zone, and comply with the provisions of the town's comprehensive zoning bylaw. The proposed zoning bylaw amendment only permits a second dwelling unit in a single detached dwelling, not in a townhouse or semi-detached dwelling, as the proposed official plan amendment specifies that where a second dwelling unit is proposed in a townhouse or a semi-detached unit, a zoning bylaw amendment is required. A second dwelling unit means a second dwelling unit on a lot with a principal dwelling that is created through converting part of or adding onto the existing dwelling that maintains an independent entrance or within a detached accessory building. Second dwelling units are also referred to as secondary suites, basement apartments, accessory apartments, granny flats, in-law apartments, or nanny suites. Second dwelling units permitted with any principal residential dwelling, single, semi, or townhouse dwelling, are subject to the following. Only one second dwelling unit is permitted per lot. The maximum floor area of the unit does not exceed 65 square meters, and one entrance is permitted to face a street inclusive of the principal dwelling. Entrance to the second dwelling unit must be separate from the entrance provided for the principal dwelling, and a minimum of one parking stall is required, and it may not be located in a private garage or carport and has to be in accordance with section 6.16 of the bylaw. And a building permit must be issued. If a secondary dwelling unit is proposed in a detached accessory building, the unit must be located within the cluster of buildings on the property. No accessory residential building or structure shall exceed 7.2 meters in height. If the second dwelling unit is in an accessory structure and not connected to the principal dwelling, the second dwelling unit must meet the requirements for accessory structures on the property. And if the second dwelling unit is within the agricultural zone, the maximum distance an SDU is permitted from the closest portion of the principal dwelling unit on a property with a well and or a septic servicing is 40 meters. At the time of preparing this presentation, no comments were received, but since that time, a number of comments have been sent in via email or phone calls, and the comments received to date are summarized as follows. Sherry Rusin provided written comments and is a registered participant for tonight's meeting. Sherry is hoping to accommodate housing for her mother-in-law on their property for care purposes and is supportive of the policies and regulations. Murray and Helen Downing provided written comments and expressed that their primary concern is parking, as they are currently experiencing issues with parking in their neighborhood. Further, they inquired if the second dwelling units will need to be registered and or licensed. Anne Marie Matthews spoke with staff regarding her support of second dwelling units, as it will make a difference in how she can care for her aging parents, keep them out of long-term care, provide for a better quality of life, and allow for intergenerational living. Anne Marie is also a registered participant at tonight's meeting. Evan Lung had a phone call with staff and followed up with an email voicing his support for second dwelling units in Pelham, as he and his wife hope to build a second dwelling unit on their property for his in-laws. This will provide for an affordable and suitable solution for housing and allow them to be close to their grandchildren for care purposes. Michael and Mary Hughes provided written comments and believe that the town of Pelham and Niagara are unaffordable for first-time homebuyers. In principle, they agree with the policies and regulations, but believe that existing parking bylaws, such as parking on streets, must be enforced. Adequate and acceptable paved parking be available on the property for both existing residents and those in the second dwelling unit, but limit the amount paved in the front yard, and that the second dwelling unit is only in the primary residence and no conversion to duplexes be permitted. Mike and Carol Jones are not supportive and would like SDUs to only be permitted in new subdivisions, only in a basement, not in an accessory structure, and require notification to neighbors if someone in the area is building a second dwelling unit. Mike Jones is registered as a participant at tonight's meeting as well. Tim Nohara is supportive of policies and grateful that Pelham will be providing policies to permit second dwelling units as an affordable solution to the housing crisis. Some comments speak to the maximum size of the second dwelling units, such as the zoning of the property should dictate the permitted size of the unit. For example, agriculturally zoned property have larger areas, therefore permitted to have a larger sized unit. Also, it was suggested to increase the maximum distance of a second dwelling unit in an accessory structure on an agriculturally zoned property from 40 meters as proposed to 100 meters or larger from the principal dwelling. Patrick Maloney provided comments specific to the interpretation of the provincial policies, which he will expand upon tonight as a registered participant at this meeting. Todd Barber provided written comments and is supportive of the policies and regulations. As a local designer, he understands the demand for good quality, affordable rental units and believes that it's important to provide for family members of all ages to provide an affordable solution to those in need while supplementing the income to help take the edge off the burden of ownership. Annette Mastracci was in communication with staff and provided written comments in support of the policies and regulations. Annette believes that the permission of secondary dwelling units will take pressure off of long-term care homes and allow families to take on care of their aging family members. Also, these policies will negate the rise in real estate costs and unaffordability of housing by providing an affordable housing option within the town. Overall, the comments presented here tonight and the number of discussions over the phone with the public are generally supportive and have a recurring theme of questions regarding increasing the maximum size of the second dwelling unit on a property within the agricultural area. In summary, town staff have provided a brief outline of the proposed policy and regulatory changes relating to second dwelling units for information purposes. We're now seeking public input on those proposals. We note that the drafts may be changed following this meeting, and the input received before any final changes would be considered by council. Town staff are not making any recommendations or decisions at this meeting. We welcome the opportunity for feedback and input on these amendments. Any questions or comments on these files can be forwarded to myself, Tara Lynn O'Toole, through the contact information on this slide. This presentation is available on the town's website as part of the agenda package for future reference. Thank you.
Okay, thank you for that presentation. Madam Clerk?
Through you, Mr. Mayor, thank you. That does bring us to the public portion of the meeting. And we do have some pre-registered members of the public. The first would be Sherry Russin. We'll just bring her into the meeting. Just give us one moment. Hi, Sherry. I can see you're in the meeting, but you're muted. If you could just unmute yourself, please. Thanks, Sherry. If you'd like to go ahead with your verbal presentation.
Thank you. Through the mayor. Thank you for this opportunity to comment on the proposed secondary dwelling units in the town of Pelham. We feel that More Homes for More Choices Act is something that may be helpful for our young families in Pelham. In 2020 has changed the outcome of our 5-year plan greatly. We are looking forward to new ideas and going forward. COVID has caused us to lose over 90% of our income that we used to maintain 2 households. We are trying new things and also working with outside the home to be able to keep everyone keep everyone under a house. As my mother-in-law's mobility has deteriorated greatly due to the COVID lockdowns, it has been easier for my daughter to come home and help look after her, but also graced us with a beautiful grandson. With all this taking place, what can we do to make everything better in our home? We have looked at this summary and not sure if it would work for us or not, but there's lots of questions that have not been answered by the by this act. Excuse me. There is a couple of things I would like to see some clarity. If it doesn't work for us, we hope that maybe help out other people in the community. We understand and respect that other members of our community think about this issue. Unfortunately, our last council was never concerned about rural Pelham or agriculture, only about the downtown Fawn Hill core. Our hope is that our sitting council will able to see that what fits Fawn Hill is not necessarily what fits all of Pelham and her needs. The main question that we have in regards to the single secondary dwellings is, if a main dwelling is, say, 1,800 square feet, and you plan to build a secondary dwelling, say, at about 1,500 square feet, the bylaw is saying that it needs to be about 130 feet maximum away, but you have amended that to be a larger distance from the main dwelling so that they can use the existing water and septic systems. But that is going to be necessarily accessible in all applications. Also, the other problem being that this existing septic system is not designed for the amount of use, or the cistern is not going to be able to withstand all the traffic flow of laundry, etc., coming from a home, and may require to add new septic systems and or cisterns, as well as the possibility of hydro if the existing hydro is not adequate on the property. None of this has been anything in these amendments that I could find personally says anything about these systems being able to add new systems, etc. The second question that we had in regards to the secondary dwelling unit doesn't say anything in regards to basements. Question being that, as I understand under the building code, that you must have a sub pump in a new building. Also, most cases, if you have a smaller home, you have your HVAC, your hot water tanks, your electrical panel, a water system if you need to have that, all located in the basement with the sub pump. This is not even mentioned in the plans. Another question we have is, and this is from the comments of other members in our community that are worried about parking issues. In rural areas, we don't really have that, but there is one concern that has not been addressed, is the driveways. A new driveway may be needed in some instances. As per building code, there must be a turnabout as there's no backing up on regional roads. This again has not been addressed at all in said amendment. Also, one other thing, if we say build a secondary dwelling on a property and we take money, build this beautiful secondary home so that the other person can stay to look after an older family member, and 10, 15 years down the road, the property is sold. Can that secondary dwelling be severed off so that the family that's been living there maintain their home that they have built? Those are just our questions, and I thank you for your time.
Okay. Thank you, Ms. Rushin, for taking the time to attend the meeting. Those questions will be answered at the end of this meeting, or our staff will be in contact with you. Thank you, Madam Clerk.
Thank you. Through you, Mr. Mayor, our second pre-registered member of the public is Anne Marie Matthews. We'll just be bringing her into the meeting now. Hi, Anne. I see that you've unmuted yourself, so if you'd like to go ahead with your verbal presentation. Thank you.
Okay. I can't see myself, so, oh, there we go. Hi, everyone. Thank you for this opportunity. I moved to Fenwick with my family almost 2 years ago now because my father was diagnosed with dementia. And in this 2-year period, what I have learned is that my family is really in an unsustainable situation. I currently drive 30 minutes to Port Dalhousie each way to attend regularly family visits, to provide care, to deal with acute scenarios with delusions or paranoias, to support my mom. And sadly, this really isn't sustainable when you factor in working full time and child rearing and community involvement. So I am very thankful that this second dwelling policy is in review, because it gives me tremendous hope that as a family, we can find a sustainable solution to our intergenerational needs. Really, dementia care requires a full family effort. And the burden of care really falls to the family, because there really aren't resources until many years down when you're in an acute situation. And so it does take a full family to endure the longevity and the intensity of this caregiving role. There are 3 considerations that I would like to present to Council this evening. I too live on an agricultural property of 10 acres. And the first one is, I understand that there's the maximum of 700 square feet for a second dwelling unit. And my parents, they've been married for over 50 years, and I don't know if they could survive even pre-dementia 700 square feet together. But with dementia, there are basic needs in terms of square footage and planning that needs to be accounted for, in terms of wheelchair accessibility for loss of mobility, bathroom considerations, and also, very importantly, a second bedroom accommodation. There have been many times that we've had to deal with personality changes that have been very volatile, and we need to be able to separate my mom, in her own space for her own safety. And she's not able to necessarily just leave the home, because she also has to take care of my father's state of well-being. There also needs to be consideration for respite care down the road, so that if we needed to have someone stay overnight to support my mom, in that accommodation, that could be a professional and safe accommodation as well. So I present that, if the town could consider for properties with a certain amount of acreage to either look at a 50% of the primary dwelling, or certainly for our needs, we would need something closer to at least 1,500 square feet to meet for appropriate elder care support in a second dwelling. Secondly, I understand that there is the limitation or a maximum distance of the location 40 meters away, or 130 square feet. Certainly on an agricultural in 10 acres, we have an abundance of space. And what I'd like to present from a sustainability perspective for caregivers and to prevent caregiver burnout is the importance for privacy. Given the intensity of the care that we are dealing with on a daily basis, having an ability to have my parents, potentially, at 400 feet away, to have a little bit of space gives them the privacy and the dignity that they want for their elder years. But also it allows us to protect young children from the volatility, the paranoia, the delusions, And it allows, just as a daughter, to also deal with the intensity of this, to process. This is a very long grieving scenario where you lose your loved one bit by bit. And so to be able to safeguard my own family's health and well-being, that space, I think, is paramount in terms of long-term sustainability and not having caregiver burnout. Lastly, I asked there to be a consideration for the possibility of a conversion of an existing footprint or building. We have, for instance, a barn that's a two-story barn that's about 2,400 square feet. And it is really in an idyllic location for a second dwelling unit, and it's already on the topography. It's already familiar in the neighborhood. And converting this to a second dwelling unit would also reduce the environmental impact as well on our property. So that's something that if the town would consider, especially for agricultural A properties with considerable space to look at perhaps existing barns or structures that could be converted, that would be greatly appreciated. So I thank you for this time, and I thank you for looking at this policy for the town's needs, and certainly for empowering families that want to take care of their elders with care and compassion, and to lessen the burden on the already taxed healthcare system. Thank you.
Okay, thank you, Ms. Matthews, for bringing your concerns to this meeting. And staff will possibly address some of your questions at the end. Madam Clerk?
Thank you, Mr. Mayor. Our next pre-registered member of the public is Mr. Mike Jones. We're just bringing him into the meeting now. If you could just give us a moment. And we're just going to ask Mr. Jones to unmute himself. Mr. Jones, you're unmuted now if you'd like to go ahead with your verbal presentation.
Thank you.
Please feel free to go ahead.
Mayor, Councilor, and Planning Department. After a long and tedious time of reviewing an innovative guide for more homes, more choices, the Ontario Housing Supply Action Plan, and the Voice of Pelham, January the 13th, 2021 edition, page 6, the notice of the public meeting, Monday, February the 8th, 2021 at 5:30, file name second dwelling unit, file number AM-04-2021 and OP-AM-01 2021 Pelham, Niagara, and Pelham Community Planning and Development Department Planning Application Report, January 11th, 2011, report information on second dwelling units, and the Pelham website for business and development second dwelling unit report of January 12, 2021, and the Corporation of the Town of Pelham bylaw number XXX 2021, a bylaw to adopt second dwelling units. I find in holding future public meetings now and when the pandemic is over creates no harm. Here's a novel idea to deal with this bylaw amendment now that the file name is second dwelling unit and file number is AM-04-2021 and OP-AM-01-2021 has been set in motion by the Planning Department of Pelham. Why don't we finish this meeting tonight by making a motion to stay the amendment until we can hold other public meetings in the future and when the pandemic is over? I feel that this bylaw amendment is such a major change in the fabric of our town's identity and lifestyle that a motion to stay is a must. I believe we need to stay on this motion to allow for true democracy. We need this because it affects the whole town's population, not just one small portion. We need to stay the motion until the pandemic is over, so that all who wish to be heard and those who want to to show support can be seen. We need this because the vast majority of residents do not even realize that what has been put forward due to the lack of transparency. A major amendment to this warrants a letter to all citizens in the town, not just a one-time notice to our local paper or a notice on the town's website. Too many citizens don't have the knowledge of how to maneuver the website or have a computer. These people will be affected by this amendment. Many people do not get hard copy newsprints, and others do not receive online news because today's world, some people receive news through social media. I'm not saying this because I'm against these notices, but I feel that many citizens are not aware of the amendment. I see the lack of public notice as the same way the two new proposed developments off Port Robinson and the Steve Bauer Trail proposed change went. This created a major change in the proposal due to a motion on January the 11th and created unnecessary workload on the planning department just because of the lack of notice to the general public. In a time when major shutdowns, we need governments on all levels to be innovative in ways to connect with the constituents. We need the town to be able to find ways to listen to the wishes of our citizens. We need to have the voices of the grassroots to be heard, not discarded as troublemakers. We need our town administrator to prove to the public that they are listening to the public request to be heard. The town must inform the entire populations of the changes that they are proposing by finding ways and using tools at their disposals. Letters sent out to all residents when major changes are sought after must be one tool. Weekly notification in our local papers of major changes are another tool. Making a chat line on their website can create more people to bring forward ideas. By having more public meetings on topics, not just one or two, would allow and encourage for more participants. The way that they have been following does not give a clear form of transparency or real democracy to the constituency. It has been clearly demonstrated that the following protocols and procedures that have been put in place during normal times is not enough to inform or to allow proper debate during this pandemic. Again, I will repeat, number one, a motion to stay this amendment is needed to provide true democracy. Number two, it is imperative to have a hard copy letter is required to be sent out to all residents prior to any major changes in bylaws. Number three, that this is a major attempt to change the town's identity and lifestyle. And number four, this is an amendment, must be stayed and must be delivered in real time, not Zoom times, but at our Meridian Center, where a large enough space is that citizens wanting to be heard or wanting to show their support can attend. Number five, this amendment must be put on hold to when it is possible to hold such a meeting due to the major effect it will have on the town as a whole. Respectfully, I submit this to you. Mike Jones from 44 Emmett. Thank you.
Mr. Jones, thank you for your presentation. You raised some interesting points for this council to consider, and perhaps we'll have some thought at the end of the meeting. Thank you.
Thank you, Mr. Mayor. The next pre-registered members of the public is John and Jill Kappa. We'll just be bringing them into the meeting now. Hi, John. I can see you in the meeting if you'd like to unmute yourself. Perhaps we'll send you
There you go.
There, you're unmuted. Please feel free to go ahead with your verbal presentation.
I'm just going to start my video here so I could just see if Can you guys see me okay? I can't really see myself here.
So we can hear you, but we can't see your video. Your wife wasn't able to get the video portion working during the test Zoom meeting, but we certainly can hear you loud and clear.
Okay, great. Thanks, everyone, and thank you for allowing me to speak to everyone. As you know, this thing has been going on for quite some time, and what I want to do here tonight is just talk about not just one side, really both sides, to understand kind of what this really means. And I think the one perspective I want to start with, very simply, is that this is not something new to municipality like Pelham. This has gone on all over the province, guys. And over time, because of the mandate from the province, municipalities have slowly kind of, brought this into the fold, and in a responsible way. So although there still are fears in our community, and I understand that, the parking, there's a lot of things that are going on there, which make total sense. There is a way to go about this where people have already gone through the process. So I'm not sure if we have to reinvent the wheel here and try to get, as much information as we can. A lot of the information is already out there. And I'm sure Tara, for example, has done a lot of research online. And you can see that there's all kinds of examples where there's agricultural properties that have dealt with this. There's downtown properties that have dealt with this. So my big point here, guys, is instead of trying to create something that seems so new, we really need to get going on this and follow what the rest of the province is doing so that we're perceived as a community that is welcoming and allowing all the things that you've heard so far tonight. It's funny, we always want more time, which we do. We always want more time to, get it right or be better. But I don't know how Anna's parents are feeling about time right now. They don't really have much time. And what we have to do, guys, is we have to act decisively here to say what's best for the majority of people in our community. I don't mind listening to everyone, but if you're a have and you don't have an issue with your in-laws and you don't need another apartment, of course this is something you're not going to support. I get that because it doesn't affect you. But when you have somebody in your family that needs that extra care and you can't afford it and you want that extra dwelling, to me, that's what's really important about what we're trying to do here. That's what the Ministry of Ontario saw and put forward. So a lot of the work, guys, that we're doing here, it's a little bit, I know we have to go through semantics and that's fine, but a lot of the work's already been done. There's nothing really here to create that's new. It's just to say, yes, we're on board, and I'm great to see that the town staff has presented all that information, but now it's a bit about the details, and the details being, what does it specifically mean to Pelham? But the initiative has to go forward, guys, for the people that you've listened to tonight and so many that couldn't be here in terms of, so let's talk about who it affects. So obviously it affects seniors, guys, and we know that. I mean, seniors that have lived in Pelham their whole life, not everybody ended up with a big retirement bank account, okay? Maybe some of us did, others didn't. We have to think about those people. We can't base it on our own needs. And so for me, if a senior can live their last 10 or 15 years of their life in their own community, going to their own stores, talking to their own friends, what better way to reward a citizen of our community, right? So let's keep them in town. Let's find a way. This addresses that. The other thing is young people, young people who are maybe trying to finish school that don't have the support of their parents or family. They're struggling just to make ends meet. And now we're giving them less and less options to be in our community because of whatever reason, whether the rent's too high, there's just not places. So now young people will be leaving, or young people won't be attracted to us because of this huge barrier of cost, right? And then I thought about the average middle-class family, and the average middle-class family wants everything that everybody wants, good school for their kids, a good job, all those type of things. I know that it happened for me when I came to Pelham 20 something years ago. And that's what I saw in this community, an ability to bring my young family here and grow as a person, as a community member, and raise a great family. And I think if we don't bring this affordability in somehow, we're not going to have those young families. We're only going to have the young families, as I said before, that can afford that, top percentile homes. And I think we really have to think big picture here, guys. And again, the barriers are there, but they're manageable. So that's kind of what I wanted to talk about kind of on a big picture. The other thing that we're not talking about is the economic impact. I mean, I know that, there's personal things that are going on here, but by doing this, you're diversifying the existing housing and rental stock in the town. So now you got more options for people. You're providing the supplementary income to homeowners. So for example, if a homeowner is going through a problem with COVID and all of a sudden they can't pay their mortgage, if they can rent out their basement, they may be able to make their mortgage payment. I mean, I know it sounds very simple, but it could be that simple, guys. And then of course, we heard it already in the presentation, making better use of the existing infrastructure on our properties, right? However, all to code, all to zoning, everything must be, dotted and crossed, right? Absolutely everything in terms of, being safe for tenants, right? That's the main goal here. What other positives do we have here? I mean, there's a lot of, things that have really come out that are really, kind of helping people get their head around this. But there's a stat out there that, and I'm sure you guys have seen this online, but almost a quarter of all rental units in Canada are secondary type suites. Actually, I shouldn't say secondary. They're all those names that Tara had in her presentation. They have a name. There's so many different names. But the idea being that it makes up a quarter, right? So it's there already. And the worst part of this, guys, is most of them are illegal. So here's the question I want to put back to council. If we don't move with this, how do you deal with all the people doing this right now in their homes illegally? At least if there's a legal process for a community person to go about, that they've registered, that they have this in place. The other thing it'll do, the ones that are underground right now, they now may apply, right, for to be a secondary unit, which is now creating real data, real information for the town. So now you know more about who's actually doing this. There could be some people that don't want to register, and that's fine. And they should be penalized by the law if they get caught. But all the people that are trying to benefit from this and do good from this, they'll register. So now you'll know that, so-and-so's house, there's a family there. Yes, they're abiding by all the rules and they're ready to go. So there is a way forward. All the municipalities out in Ontario that have already incorporated this have found a way. And when I read all the information, what I found was it wasn't that they all supported it because they needed housing, different housing. It was what were the details in our area that were important to us. So those are the things I think that you're hearing from the other people tonight. The agricultural question, the size of the property, which is great. But overall, I really hope that, council follows, everyone's opinion here, especially the staff, knowing the data behind it to move forward on this. And, in terms of any rebuttal, I think where it starts with, guys, is education. I think a lot of people in the community don't have a great idea what, even though they may have gone to the site or they've read the article, what does it really mean for a secondary dwelling unit? And I think once the town makes that completely clear, a majority of the population in our community will be on board, guys. It only makes sense and it's only logical because everybody has a story like Anna in their family. It's not something that's unusual these days. Seniors are having a tougher and tougher time making ends meet. And so just for that reason alone, the compassion to allow a family to manage their own family, I mean, to me, I don't know what else could be more important in a community to do. I mean, your family's everything, right? All I want to say at the very end is that really for the town to meet their planning objectives in the future, there is no other way but to adopt this moving forward. It's one piece, but it's one piece of that major plan. So even to just meet your future goals, you'll need this in place. So I hope that everyone does vote for this as quickly as possible. And if we had time, guys, yeah, we could keep going, but I don't think people have time anymore. And as you know, this process has been going on for almost 2 years with the town, which I think is ample time to come up with some direction. Thank you very much, everyone. I really appreciate your time tonight.
Thank you, John, for making your presentation, taking your time to come to the meeting. We will no doubt discuss some of your points at the end of it. Madam Clerk?
Through you, thank you, Mr. Mayor. Our next pre-registered member to speak is Mr. Patrick Mulhooney. We'll just bring him into the meeting now. Hi, Patrick. I can see you in the meeting. It looks like you're unmuted if you'd like to go ahead.
Good evening. Thank you. Good evening, Mr. Mayor and members of council. My name is Patrick Maloney. I'm a partner with the law firm Sullivan Manny. I appear this evening on behalf of two clients, Homes by Antonio and Mr. Tony Mancini, who have various development interests within the town of Pelham. I thank you for the opportunity to speak this evening in relation to the new official plan and zoning policies related to second dwelling units. I'm here to request that further changes be made to the proposed amendments that would allow second dwelling units be permitted in semi-detached dwellings and townhouse dwellings as of right, and to allow secondary dwellings in the zones that those types of dwellings are permitted within. I can advise you that we've already had some pretty productive conversations with the town's planning staff. We raised our concerns with them, and I appreciate that. To get a better understanding of our client's position, I wanted to start with why these changes are proposed. And now you've already heard a number of benefits that were raised this evening on behalf of various constituents. But in order to address the provincial interests of intensification, the provision of additional housing types, providing more affordable housing types, the province has made it very clear that municipalities must have policies contained within their official plan that authorize secondary dwelling units in single detached dwellings, semi-detached dwellings, and townhouses. So unfortunately, there is really not much in choice in terms of the type of use. This is a legislative requirement, and it's found within Section 16 of the Planning Act. So in our view, the key word of that legislation is that the town must authorize second dwelling units in single detached dwellings, which it does, but also semi-detached dwellings and townhouses. Then the town can regulate the use with certain zoning standards, which is what the zoning changes provide for. And now in this case, if the town of Pelham is not immune to these legislative requirements, like all municipalities in Ontario, they must authorize these second dwelling units within semi-detached dwellings and townhouses. Now, in the case of the official plan amendments, we have expressed our concern to town planning staff that the official plan policies must authorize those second dwelling units within semis and townhouses. The current language of the official plan does not authorize the second dwelling units in semis and townhouses, but they require a further process that in the form of a zoning bylaw amendment that has to be approved by council before that type of use is authorized. So logically speaking, the town could refuse that application, which means that was never authorized. Otherwise, it would mean that any application for zoning bylaw amendment that would allow the semi or townhouse would have to be approved. So it would effectively, council couldn't deny it. If they did, then it would be contrary to the Planning Act. So in that regard, we are asking that the town include the permission for second dwelling units in both semis and townhouses, in addition to the singles, without any further planning applications, without any zoning bylaw amendment applications. If the town were to permit the second dwelling units in semis and townhouses, they would still be regulated in terms of minimum parking requirements, square footage requirements or limitations, setbacks. So anything that has already been suggested by staff that would essentially address the impacts of those secondary dwelling units within semis and townhouses. And in reality, there probably would be very little difference between a second dwelling unit in a single detached dwelling and a second dwelling in a semi or townhouse. In fact, I would also even suggest to you that in areas where semis and townhouses are permitted, it may be a more appropriate place to intensify, as opposed to perhaps in normal R1 or R2 zones. That doesn't mean that it shouldn't be allowed in the R1, R2 zones, but I'm suggesting to you that areas where semis and townhouses might be more adept for intensification. So to summarize my presentation, I would suggest to you that the town must comply with the mandatory requirements under the Planning Act, which would allow the second dwelling units to be permitted within semis and townhouses within the town. And then the town can regulate those uses in addition to the units within single detached dwellings. So I respectfully request that the town authorize them within semis and townhouses, and then add them to the zones that allow for those types of uses. Thank you for the opportunity to speak. Subject to any questions that Mr. Mayor or members of council may have, those are my submissions.
Okay. Thank you, Mr. Maloney, for making this presentation to the meeting. Please stick around until after the meeting. There might indeed be questions. Madam Clerk?
Thank you, Mr. Mayor. Our last pre-registered member of the public to speak is Mr. Stephen Kaiser. We're just bringing him into the meeting now. Stephen, looks like you're in the meeting. You're not muted if you'd like to go ahead with your verbal presentation.
Go ahead, Stephen.
Mr. Kaiser, we can't hear you. I'm not sure. It doesn't appear that you're muted. Okay, you're muted now, so perhaps just try to unmute yourself. I can see you.
How are we looking?
Oh, good. We can now hear you.
Go ahead, Mr. Kaiser.
Thanks, Holly. Mr. Mayor, members of council, town staff, ladies and gentlemen. I started the meeting out in the living room, but I've been banished to the garage, but it's heated, so we're good. Thank you for the opportunity to speak to you today in regards to the initiative of secondary dwelling units in the town of Pelham. When I heard that town staff was working on this potential change in policy, I readily indicated that I would like to do whatever I could to support the direction for a host of reasons. I feel I'm uniquely qualified to speak on the proposal through my accomplishments and past experience. I've lived in the town for over 55 years, and I've watched it change and grow. In 1986, I left the police service here in Niagara to join my father in a residential building and land development company. Since then, I've been president of the Niagara Home Builders Association, the Ontario Home Builders Association, and the Urban Development Institute. At one point in my career as vice president of residential operations at what was then Canada's largest residential developer, and I've been qualified as an expert witness in terms of the residential construction industry at the Supreme Court of Canada. I've worked with numerous municipalities in terms of their legislative initiatives dealing with housing, and I've been at the table when legislation was drafted by the province dealing with our industry. My first experience with this type of work was almost 35 years ago when the town last revised its zoning bylaw. I represented a group of commercial property owners on Highway 20 in Fonthill who wanted to ensure the new zoning bylaw recognized their current uses and gave the flexibility for redevelopment in the future. 35 years ago, and we're still dealing with the same zoning bylaw, which is not only outdated in terms of new planning policies, but lacks the vision and direction for growth and redevelopment in the town for years to come. I applaud council for understanding the need and committing the resources to update this stagnant bylaw. Tonight's initiative is certainly a positive step in that direction. As council knows, the town updated the official plan in 2014, a kind of hand-in-glove policy that works with the zoning bylaw to implement the direction of the official plan. A revised zoning bylaw was mandated by the province to reflect the new official plan, and clearly this has not taken place. This is particularly relevant for this initiative of secondary dwellings, as the official plan designated a specific area in the town for what was then called accessory apartments. However, the zoning bylaw to implement this vision was never updated, making the direction useless, unless an individual property owner moved forward with a site-specific zoning, which is somewhat of a daunting task. I can speak to that personally, as last year I owned 2 lots on Emmett Street, both 50 feet by 162 feet deep, in an area designated by the official plan for accessory apartments. Clearly, these 2 lots would have been prime examples of a situation where an accessory dwelling or secondary apartment would be an asset not only to the end user, but to the town in terms of the housing choice it would provide. When I reflect on whether to move forward with a rezoning, I recall 30 years ago, we purchased a house on the same street, renovated the house, and severed two lots slightly smaller than the existing lots on the street. There was a public meeting at town hall, and I can recall one of the neighbors actually crying in our presentation to council that these new homes would destroy the neighborhood. Today, I challenge you to drive down the street and point homes we can. This is why initiative like this needs to be in policy. The not in my backyard concerns far outweigh the tangible benefits they bring to our town in terms of greater choices for housing, affordability, and an option for us to look after each other in a beneficial manner. I reflect on our own immediate family and how our living situations have changed and evolved. When my son was in university, his girlfriend moved in with us for a year due to a family situation. My sister, when she was in middle age, moved back home with my parents for 8 years while she furthered her education. As my parents got older, they sold their house here in Fonthill and moved in with my sister for a number of years, and she cared for them. My niece and nephew at different times have lived with my mother-in-law here in Fonthill for a total of 10 years, seeking an affordable place to live. Last year, my wife and I purchased my mother-in-law's house. She's 92 and currently living with us. I use the examples to show some unique living experiences I'm sure that are not that uncommon to other families. I will tell you, though, that in each example, while living under the same roof was a workable arrangement, it would have been much better if a secondary dwelling was part of the home. Well, these examples are all with my family members. There's a realm of possibilities beyond that for property owners with the ability to have a secondary dwelling. Affordability is a big part of the discussion in terms of housing choice. The biggest component impacting affordability of our housing is the land component. Let's go back to the 50-foot lots I mentioned on Emmett Street. The current land value is $5,000 a front foot or $250,000 for the lot. On top of that, the price of the town's development charge is $18,963 for a single family home. The region's development charge is $20,112, and the town's park dedication fee is $12,500, all payable with the issuance of a building permit, making the total cost before a building permit over $300,000. I'm not arguing the charges. I'm simply stating the fact that producing an affordable dwelling unit for someone to live in is not possible if these costs are solely borne by the principal residents alone. The provisions for secondary dwellings are not new, as I mentioned before, to the municipal sector. They are encouraged by the province, and they are now adopted in policy in municipalities across Ontario, here in Niagara, and yes, here in Pelham. The secondary plan for East Fonthill creates a framework for more creative zoning bylaws proposed by developers and endorsed by the town, and they are much more conducive to the range of housing choices that the market is looking for today, including in some new subdivisions here, the provision for secondary dwellings. If this form of housing is allowed in a new plan of subdivision, I ask why it would not be allowed across the town with the same type of provisions and controls. A bylaw allowing secondary dwellings also assists the town, ensuring that these units are not only built within the provisions of the bylaw, but they're constructed in a manner that is overseen by the building department and conforms in every way to all aspects of the Ontario Building Code. This is a key part to ensure that all life safety aspects are in place through the construction of the secondary dwelling unit. It appears to date there has not been much uptake in the terms of secondary dwellings in East Fonthill. However, the framework is in place should a homeowner choose to move forward in that direction in the future with either an attached addition, a lower level renovation, or a freestanding structure. In conclusion, I'd like to say there are so many things that have changed since the town last did a thorough review of its zoning bylaws in 1987 and the interface with the official plan. The intensification of land uses for residential purposes mandated by the province has had a huge effect on how we develop, build, and live in our residential communities, both presently and for years to come. The fact we're in the midst of a pandemic, I believe, will be a large factor on the need for policies such as this, the availability of affordable housing in our community, and the ability for our elderly to age in place will likely become an even greater need as we move forward. I applaud council and staff for the initiative. This is not a giant leap, but a small step in terms of updating the town's official plan and zoning bylaws to reflect the needs of the community and enable development to unfold in the way it is envisioned. This is an initiative that will truly benefit the people of this town for years to come. Thank you. I look forward to any questions you may have.
Okay. Thank you, Mr. Kaiser, for your presentation, for attending the meeting, and we will be getting to the questions very soon. Madam Clerk?
Through you, Mr. Mayor, thank you. That is our last pre-registered member of the public, but we did receive in an email. If I can just upload that and read that into the record for council's consideration. Through you, Mr. Mayor, this email came in at 6:24, and it states, watching the live public meeting, I would like to say the town is heading on the right direction. One of the presenters commented on agricultural property, and I say she has a point. I'm not convinced that and maximum distance from an existing dwelling is necessary. There are existing buildings in a site that can be utilized and should not be restricted by specific distance. It would be best to allow for UDS based on site-specific situations, providing the setbacks can be met. Let's not be too restrictive and allow for more flexibility. Thanks. And this email came in from a Jim Adero. Thank you, Mr. Mayor. It is 6:40. I see no other emails having come in. If you'd like to go back to the town planner to see if she wanted to address the comments and concerns raised by the public afterwards, you would be able to close the public portion of the meeting.
Okay, thank you, Madam Clerk. And we will indeed go to the town policy planner, or one of our policy planners, Ms. O'Toole. I imagine you've been taking some notes, and we will hear your statements. Thank you.
Thank you, Mr. Mayor. Yes, I've been taking all of the notes based on what we've heard tonight from all of the participants. And with respect to a lot of them, it's something that we will definitely sit down and go through in detail to try to see how we can accommodate these requests or answer anything with the whole idea of trying to figure out what is the best for Pelham as a whole. A lot of the questions with respect to the agricultural areas is something that we would like to have some direction on with respect to looking at potentially increasing the maximum size of these units within those zoned areas. And in regards to some of the questions with the septic and cistern or basement units and stuff, the Ontario Building Code is what is going to guide those principles. It's not going to be what we have in the bylaw itself. And other than that, I refer to Barb if she has anything else to add.
Ms. Weens?
Yes, thank you, Mr. Mayor. I think I have just a few other points I'd like to make. There was a question about whether or not in the agricultural area, if we do permit a second dwelling unit, could that dwelling unit be severed at some point in time in the future? I'd like to advise that that is not possible. The current policies from the province and regional policies do not permit the creation of new residential lots. So if we allow a second dwelling unit in the agricultural area, there won't be the ability to sever it in the future. So that's something that people should be aware of. As council is certainly aware, is that, you know, the protection of land in the agricultural area for agricultural uses is the paramount policy. And so there isn't, unfortunately, the ability to create new lots, new residential lots in our agricultural area. as Tara indicated, with respect to the septic systems and cisterns and any size requirements of that, those are issues that are dealt with at the time of a building permit. The region of Niagara is the approval authority for septic systems, and if a septic system needs to be expanded as a result of a second dwelling unit being added in the rural area, then that will be a permit that would be required to be obtained prior to building permit for the new second dwelling. With respect to the comments about the need for a larger size dwelling unit in the agricultural area, that is certainly something we'd like some direction from. We've been tossing that around. However, I think, the intent for the 700 square foot limitation was to provide a dwelling unit that could be, a 1 bedroom with a den, or a small 2 bedroom, or a large 1 bedroom unit. Again, we're trying to achieve the affordability targets that are needed to be addressed. And so that's why there was the limitation on the size of the dwelling unit size. And we want to also balance, again, in the agricultural area, because if we're adding new residential units that are non-farm units, then you have the potential for increased impacts on the agricultural communities. So we need to be cognizant of that. And it's a bit of a balancing act that we're trying to achieve here with respect to allowing these in the agricultural area. So the size is certainly a factor that we need to consider. And I think the rationale for the 40-meter separation in terms of having the second dwelling unit in the cluster of buildings on a farm property. Again, the intent of that was to certainly cluster the buildings where there is a cluster of buildings, so that we minimize the amount of agricultural land that is removed from production. Again, the protection of our agricultural land is the kind of the paramountcy in terms of policy. If there is an existing accessory structure on a property, certainly the intent would be to allow for it to be converted, even if it is further away than that 40 meters. So perhaps we need to provide some clarity in the policies to do that. And then I think the comments with respect to that Patrick Maloney made, certainly I don't disagree with his comments. Staff were trying and attempting to find some balance with respect to second dwelling units, and trying to provide a scenario that would be more palatable for council to consider. But certainly Mr. Maloney's comments with respect to the requirements under the legislation for second dwelling units in townhouses and semi-detached units is certainly in the legislation. And so we will go back and look at that and see what we can do to provide for greater compliance with the legislation on that front. The other comments with respect to, I think Mr. Jones made about the need to hold off on this until we can have a meeting in person, or until the end of the pandemic. I can certainly appreciate where he is coming from and his comments with respect to democracy and openness and transparent. That is certainly what we are attempting to do. We've provided to council on a few occasions now information that we are considering this to make this out in the public. As Mr. Kappa indicated, this has been an initiative that's being worked on for a while. We just, are finally getting it in front of council, because there's always been staff resource issues. It's not new. As Tara indicated, in 2019, the province passed the More Homes, More Choice legislation that requires this. But also as early as 2011, there were changes to the Planning Act that indicated that we needed to have policies in our official plan to address second dwelling units. So it has been something that we've needed to do for a number of years. And we are getting to it, and we're doing it, and we consistently get requests for second dwelling units. And you know, as Mr. Kaiser indicated, the having to go through a zoning bylaw amendment to permit these is a daunting task. And many of the members of the community that do want to do this just don't feel that they're up to that. And as a result, these things might be happening, and they're happening illegally in the community. And so we feel that there's a much stronger need to address this issue so that we can allow these second dwelling units, allow them legally, and ensure that they meet the life safety requirements of the Ontario Building Code and Fire Code. So those are my kind of comments in response to some of the public comments made. Thank you, Mr. Mayor.
Okay. Thank you, Ms. Weens. Before we go to council, of course, we have to close, I believe, Madam Clerk, the public's part of the public participation in this meeting.
Through you, Mr. Mayor, that is correct. I will just check the clerk's email address one more time, just to confirm we haven't received any new emails. And that's correct, Mr. Mayor. It is 6:50. We have not received any new emails. And if you'd like, you can close the public portion of the meeting and move into committee input.
Okay, so that's what we shall do. We will close the public portion of this meeting, and now we will turn to members of council for questions and comments. And first up, I see Councillor Kaur. Sir, you're muted.
Yes.
Okay.
Through you, Mr. Mayor, to staff. I just have a couple questions. And the first question, can an owner of a secondary SDU unit sell it to a third party and selling the building but still maintain the property?
Ms. O'Toole, do you want to tackle that?
Through you, Mr. Mayor, I'm going to refer that one to our director.
Okay, thank you. Ms. Weens?
Mr. Mayor, through you, if they are putting a second dwelling unit within the existing building, then the only way that it can be sold is to condominiumize the dwelling unit. That's unlikely to happen. If it's a second dwelling unit in an accessory structure, then again, the only way for that dwelling unit to be sold is if it's severed, and then it would need to meet the many requirements under the zoning bylaw for severance. So it's unlikely that would happen. And then, as I indicated, in the agricultural area, the policies do not allow for the severance for new residential lots.
Councillor Kaur?
Yes, through you, Mr. Mayor, again to staff. If a SDU unit was vacant, can the owner rent it as a short-term rental?
Ms. Weens?
Mr. Mayor, through you, no, he cannot. The official plan amendment and zoning bylaw amendment that council approved in July of last year does not permit short-term rental for apartment units or second dwelling units, only in a single detached dwelling.
Councillor Kaur?
Yes, and through you, Mr. Mayor. And I think one of the residents mentioned, would the residents be notified of how many SDU units are in the neighborhood or in their particular neighborhood?
Ms. Weens?
So, Mr. Mayor, through you, if council were to approve the official plan amendment and zoning bylaw amendment that allowed second dwelling units as of right, then no, the neighborhoods would not be notified. what would happen is that a building permit would be required, but that does not require public notification. So presently, the proposal does not contemplate any ability or requirement to notify the neighborhood when one is proposed. The policies that we're proposing are meant to make the second dwelling unit, particularly in a single detached dwelling, kind of as unobtrusive as possible, so that from the street, you'll likely have very little indication that there's a second dwelling unit there. The entrance to the second dwelling unit is to be off the side, so it wouldn't necessarily be visible. And while there would be the requirement for additional parking, it can be accommodated in the existing driveway, as well as the parking for the dwelling. So we also provided provisions in the zoning bylaw amendment that would prohibit the kind of paving of your front yard to accommodate parking, because again, from an urban design or streetscape, that is not something that we would think would be positive. So we're trying to develop ways of allowing these, but also to minimize the impact on the neighborhood.
Councillor Corr, we'll allow you one more question.
Yeah, and my final question is how is Niagara-on-the-Lake dealing with the SDUs?
Ms. Weens, I believe that was your former territory.
Yes, Mr. Mayor, it is. And to tell you the truth, I'm not sure if they have updated their policies or their zoning requirements since I left there in 2012. So I can't say for certain. Perhaps Tara has an update of what Niagara-on-the-Lake is doing. I know she's done some research on what all the other municipalities in Niagara are doing.
Ms. O'Toole, Lee?
Thank you, Mr. Mayor. I am just doing a quick search because Barb is right. I did look at a few, and I believe that I will be able to get back to you with more information.
Okay, why don't we go to another question, but we will...
Yeah, and I'll get back to you with that.
Okay, thank you.
Thank you.
Councillor Wink? No, you're muted, sir.
Sorry about that. Through you, Mr. Mayor, to the Director of Planning. You mentioned that you wanted the buildings to be as inconspicuous as possible with respect to the secondary dwellings. Yet, no one talked about this yet, but we're looking at building an accessory building not to exceed 7.2 meters or 23.62 feet. I would think that if the primary dwelling was considerably less than the 7.2 meters, that the accessory building in the back shouldn't be going up to 7.2 meters, should be to the minimum of the height of the accessory or the primary building to a maximum of 23.62 feet. Any consideration on that?
Ms. Weens?
Thank you, Mr. Mayor. Certainly that's something we can take a look at. The intent of that height restriction is that if somebody had a garage, that they would be able to put a second dwelling units above a garage, and that height limitation would allow for that. But certainly we can take a look at that and see if there's some other solutions that we can, that might be more palatable. The garage would likely be in the backyard, so again, it would have wouldn't have a significant impact from the street in terms of the public realm, but understanding that it could have an impact within the rear yard.
Councillor Wink?
Yeah, so in that regard, I know there was one property probably a couple of years ago in the Voice, and someone put an apartment above a garage, and it was a daunting building that towered over the neighboring properties, and I hate like heck to see us get into that situation again. Just one more comment. Even prior to receipt of Mr. Maloney's letter, I questioned the need to look at semis and townhouses differently. Like, I don't see the need to do zoning amendments on every application, and I would certainly be in favor of incorporating this in with single-family dwellings.
Okay. Thank you, Councillor. Now, any more comments or questions? I see Ms. O'Toole. Ms. O'Toole.
Found it.
Thank you, Mr. Mayor. Through you, just to address Councillor Corr's last question. I did do some research with the other municipalities, and Niagara-on-the-Lake, they permit one additional accessory dwelling unit within an existing or planned single detached and semi-detached dwelling.
Does that answer your question, Councillor Court?
Yes, thank you very much.
Okay, and thank you, Ms. O'Toole. Councillor Olson.
Yes, through you, Mr. Mayor. The presentations tonight really laid bare a lot of the issues and that we have in society today, and the COVID hasn't helped. But the idea that this will aid so many family situations, I find attractive. And I've had phone calls and things from and notes from citizens who point out that this is an aid to disabled people as well. And I wanted to make sure that was available as well, because some disabled people are capable of living on their own, and this is an opportunity to live in a proper place with and manage their own lives. And I think it's very attractive for that reason. And I just have one question for the director. I'm not clear whether you were addressing the idea of converting an existing farm building into a dwelling place, if that would be a possibility. I think one of the presenters asked the same question.
Ms. Weens?
Mr. Mayor, through you, yes, certainly that would be allowed. The issue there would be, again, the size of that conversion, whether it would be the whole building or a portion of the building being converted to a dwelling unit. We would certainly consider some type of conversion appropriate, but we have to kind of land on what is the appropriate size. And, you know, depending on what was the farm building was used for previously, if there was storage of pesticides and chemicals and so forth in that farm building, there might be the need for what's referred to as a record of site condition. It would depend on what was the nature of the uses in that farm building. And then with respect to your comment around accessibility, I do agree with that comment. There is the need to make sure that units can be accessible, particularly if they are maybe function as an addition to an existing dwelling, or the conversion of a garage or something that can be converted to be accessible. There are requirements under the building code that also in terms of new construction and new dwellings, have to meet certain standards to ensure that a dwelling can be either retrofitted or used for accessible people.
Councillor Olson?
Yes, thank you, Director. And through you, Mr. Mayor, to the Director again, I do agree with Mr. Mahoney and Councillor Wink about the semis and the townhouses, and that seems to be the appropriate way to treat that, in my opinion.
Okay, thank you. Any other comments, Councillor Olson?
No, thank you, Mr. Mayor.
Okay, and I believe I see Councillor Hildebrand.
Through you, Mr. Mayor. Thank you very much. To the Director, I have many questions. Starting off with the public notice. One of the comments made by one of the presentation individuals said that there was only one public notice put in the paper. Was that correct?
Mr. Mayor, through you, I believe there were two notices that were put in the paper within 2 consecutive weeks, one following the other.
Okay, my second question deals with item E on B 1.1.4. Second dwelling units will not contribute to density, but we included in town's intensification process. Why won't it be included in both?
Oftentimes what you see is with second dwelling units, there's some flexibility in them that you do have a second dwelling unit, but it can be easily converted back and out depending on a family's situation and circumstances. And it's pretty common practice across the province that second dwelling units are not counted as intensification or towards the intensification targets because they do evolve and they do shift in and out depending on who's living in that home. Some homes that, while they may have a second dwelling unit, a new purchaser may come in and say, I want to use the entire property and convert that second dwelling and make it part of the main dwelling. So that's generally why they're not included in the intensification targets.
I guess if I would prefer it to be included in the intensification process for reasons that are obvious, because obviously that makes a difference because numbers mean different intensification allowances that we have in the town. Mm-hmm. So continuing on with that, Airbnbs, you were very specific. They can't be used as second dwelling units.
Mr. Mayor, through you, that's correct. The policies that council adopted back in July would not permit a second dwelling unit to be used for a short-term vacation rental.
Okay. With regards to parking, we already know that one parking place per unit doesn't work. Why are we only specifying one parking unit per new second dwelling unit?
Mr. Mayor, through you, again, our standard for a dwelling is 1 space per dwelling unit. We're limiting the size of the second dwelling unit to 700 square feet. And so by limiting the size, that would also kind of limit the number of people living in the second dwelling unit. And the standard of 1 parking space for that second dwelling unit seems to be appropriate.
When you look at some of the streets in East Fond Hill and can hardly drive down there, it's hard to imagine that 1 car per unit works. And that's why we need the parking study. It's almost as if this parking study is needed before we pass the second dwelling unit policy, in my view. With regards to the septic system and all those things, I think that's critical. The design on the septic system and the water supply is critical. And I'm not sure how in the building permit process that is addressed. Can you advise me how that's addressed?
Yes, Mr. Mayor, through you, as part of a building permit in a rural area, the requirement is to have your septic permit approval from the region prior to submitting your building permit application. It's a requirement under the Ontario Building Code to deal with septic permit approvals. And so it's dealt with at building permit stage, and we require them to have that permit, the septic permit, in hand when they come and apply for their building permit.
When the person applies for a second dwelling unit, does he have all the requirements of the new homeowner to come with an approved design by either an engineer or the proper licensed individual?
Mr. Mayor, through you, yes, even if you are renovating an existing home and it's on septic system, if you're adding bedrooms and bathroom facilities, that will be a trigger for a septic system review. The region will take a look at what the existing permit is in terms of the septic permit for that dwelling. They will visit the site and they'll make a determination if the expansion to the septic system is required. If it is required, then it needs to be designed by a qualified person, and the region reviews the designs for the septic system and approves it. Same with any kind of construction. They needs to be, all drawings need to be submitted to the town in terms of building permit drawings. They have to meet the Ontario Building Code requirements, and so they have to be prepared by qualified people.
So, to the director again, thank you so much. With regards to the drawings prepared, say an individual wants to renovate his house to create a second building unit, but the homeowner just can't go in there by himself saying he's the individual, come to you with his sketches, and that's an approved design. Is that correct?
They have to meet the minimum requirements under the Ontario Building Code in terms of what is shown on the drawings, the specifications of those drawings, the walls, the insurance, the truss designs, all of that. That needs to meet the standards under the Ontario Building Code. Can a person draw their own drawings if they meet those standards, and if the size of the building is below a certain threshold that's identified in the Ontario Building Code, then yes, they can prepare their own drawings. But again, they have to be prepared and have all the required information on them.
Okay, thank you so much. That's all my questions at this point. Thank you.
Okay, thank you. I see Councillor Hahn.
Thank you, Mayor. So we know, this is to the director, we know, and I know I've asked you at this the last time we had a meeting, and that is the parking study that's being done. So I think we're looking at April, May-ish, something like that, for that to be done. So I think it would be jumping the gun to assume that we only need one at this point in time, because that hasn't been determined. So I think it's important that the consultant that's working on the parking study address what will be required for these secondary dwelling units as well. So hopefully that's part of the work they're going to be doing. So in addition to isolating, the locations across Pelham that are going to have to address parking because there just isn't enough, we also know the parking study essentially is going to change the number of units that a developer would need to have. Earlier, it was mentioned that 700 square feet small, so there may not be more than one car, but I would beg to differ. I've lived in a lot of downtown cores across Canada, and 700, although it does sound relatively small, can easily have two people, and doesn't mean that that's one vehicle. So what often happens is there's two vehicles, and so there'll be one that'll be parked in perhaps a driveway, and the other one goes in the street, and the neighboring residential area neighbors aren't too happy about always having someone parked in front of their home. So I think it's important that we really nail down what we need to have as far as parking, and also another way around that is to address, and I think that's something else the town has to do, is address on streets that are narrow, and exactly to what Councillor Hildebrand was alluding to. There's a lot of times where you're trying to drive down streets and you've got parked cars on either side, and so you're playing, stop and go with whatever cars you're trying to also get down and pass. So you can't have two cars driving down a street at the same time. And when it's very busy around holidays or whatever it is, it's very difficult, and it's very frustrating for people who live on that street if they're trying to have company over and the company has to park 2 blocks away because all the spots are taken on the street. So addressing those very busy streets, narrow streets where this could be allowed, and ensuring perhaps there's only one side of the street at certain times that's, one side of the street is parking and not both. So it alleviates the congestion, but also it needs to be addressed in the actual policy of people who are going to be building the secondary units and what they're going to be allowed or are required to provide their tenant. Thank you.
Okay, thank you for those comments, Councillor Hahn. I see Councillor Stewart.
Yes, thank you. Through you, Mr. Mayor. One of the things I'm concerned about, it says that you must indicate that the dwelling units on the property do not need to be owner occupied. It seems to me that the main intent of this is to provide housing for, family members who need to downsize or need help. But if it doesn't need to be like owner occupied, obviously you're not looking after your family there. So once this is done, it's a permanent separate unit on the property. So there's nothing to indicate that the owner of the property needs to be there. So they can both simply be rental units that can wind up in any residential neighborhood. And my other big concern again is the parking, and I don't believe we should go forward with this at all until we have the parking study and have come up with a new parking bylaw. Thank you.
Thank you, Councillor Stewart. Now we'll go back to any other councillors, and I see Councillor Olson. You have your hand.
Yes, through you, Mr. Mayor. Am I right in understanding that the width of the driveway has been adjusted so that there's, for example, a single car driveway would be able to take 2 cars? Is that correct? Am I understanding that correctly, Director?
Ms. Weens?
Mr. Mayor, through you. So yes, if you had a single wide driveway, you would be allowed to widen that to accommodate parking for an additional car. If it's a double wide driveway, then you could have tandem parking in your driveway as well. But we restricted the amount of kind of front yard that could be devoted to parking because, again, we don't want the entire front yard paved for parking.
Okay. Thank you, Ms. Weens. Anything else, Councillor Olson?
No, thank you, Mr. Mayor.
Okay. Again, I'll look at any other member of council that has any other further comments or questions. Okay. Oh, I see Councillor Stewart.
Yes, thank you. Through you, Mr. Mayor. Back to the question of being bed and breakfast, not short-term rentals, but real bed and breakfast. Under the section, I'm trying to find my notes here. Yeah, it says under the Niagara Escarpment Plan, it says secondary units shall not be permitted in a group home or a single dwelling containing a bed and breakfast. Would that apply to the whole town of Pelham, where, for example, if you're operating a legal bed and breakfast, that you wouldn't be able to add on an accessory dwelling as well?
Ms. Weens?
Mr. Mayor, through you, that is not something that we are proposing. Again, if it's a bed and breakfast, perhaps on a rural property and they have a large property and there's the ability to still put up a second dwelling unit, then that might be something we'd look at. The policy that you were referring to was specific to the Niagara Escarpment Plan, and it's their policy.
Councillor?
Thank you.
Okay, thank you. I guess my 2 cents on this item is I think it's long overdue for this town. I think it's long overdue for all towns in Ontario. There's a homeless situation in this country that every politician is trying to address. 35,000 Canadians don't have a roof over their heads. This is definitely something with the right controls that would help the situation in the region. And I'm hoping that we can, as a council, come to a conclusion. We've heard so many people here tonight that are waiting for this. They need this. There's so many elderly people out there that do not have enough money saved up to afford these what it takes to live in a long-term or in a seniors building. And the fact that they can stay with their loved ones is just it's just compelling for us to get this done as soon as we can, and as least disruptive to neighborhoods as we can. But to deny that there's a need for this it's not socially responsible. And those are my 2 cents. Thank you. Any other comments that we going forward? Councillor Hahn.
Through the mayor. Yes, I'd like to see perhaps a spreadsheet or a grid and just some comparisons against some of the other municipalities. So we know Ms. O'Toole mentioned what Niagara Lake's doing. I noticed that they took the townhouse element out of it, but said semi-detached, I think it was. So just a little comparison. So, quick and dirty kind of, here's some area municipalities that are taking this on. Here's what they're doing. and really best practices. So things that have worked, things that haven't. So if you reach out to some of them too, what did you include? Why did you do it? What's working? What do you wish you did and you didn't do? Just so we're learning from people and not, again, reinventing the wheel ourselves, but learning from folks who have already implemented this and things that have worked or things that aren't working. That would be very helpful. Thank you.
Okay, and we'll go back to the policy planner that put this together. Ms. O'Toole, is that something you can work on, please?
Sorry, Mr. Mayor. Yes, of course. I do have a lot of research completed, and I have had the chance to speak to some other municipalities, so I can definitely put that into something clear that we can all see, and you can see the comparisons for sure.
Great, thank you for that. Any other questions? I guess the one question I will ask Director of Planning, maybe the CAO, but Director of Planning, I would think that there was a complaint lodged by Mr. Jones about the lack of advertising, what have you. I know that we do have it up on the town's website. Again, maybe people don't have computers, and I don't know if we have and I don't know if this would be totally out of whack. I wonder what it would cost the town to do a complete mailing of the residents. And again, I know we don't do that ever on an unusual planning thing, and I don't know if it's needed this time. I guess what's your comments on that as a staffer and as a planning person?
If I may.
Oh, okay, Mr. CAO.
From a starting point, there are a little over 7,000 residences, separate addresses in the town of Pelham. It's $1 a stamp, adding an envelope, and the printing costs were not set up for that sort of mass mailing on a frequent basis. And then the time, I don't know, $14,000, $15,000 to do that.
Okay.
But I would recharacterize this. We've been functioning really well in COVID shutdown for 11 months now.
Yep.
We've got all sorts of business done. We've fully complied with the law. We've done more than the Planning Act requires. That's advertised. Heck, I shared news of this on my own Facebook profile. We've gone well beyond through social media, etc. And the reality is that during lockdown, we have a far higher rate of citizen engagement because people are reading the newspaper, because people do watch us on Zoom, etc. Because frankly, during a lockdown, I mean, there's a dearth of entertainment options. There's a dearth of things you can, and it's a great opportunity for people to engage with their community. So that engagement's up, it's not down. So with all respect, that the sentiment is the reverse of the reality. There's nothing particularly unique about what's being proposed here. As one of the members of the public did indicate, I mean, this has been law in province for, but we're closer to 2 years than we are a year and a half.
Longer,
right. But I mean, it's been a major push for a year and 3/4 or so. It was in fact created in law, I don't know, 7 years ago, like that.
2011.
Okay, a full decade. We're now grasping this. So it's not something being pushed through at the last minute. We've kind of waited about as long as is decently possible. And the law requires us to provide a way to do this. So not moving forward, not an option. Now, that doesn't mean we can't take into consideration the results of a parking study, for instance, but we do need to be moving forward. We have communicated very effectively to the community. You've just had a fair bit of public response on this already, and I imagine there'll be fairly good media coverage of this very meeting, although that's just a guess. We would not endorse, there's nothing particular or unique on this item. It is not more critical to the future of the community than with short-term rental, where we didn't do rental mailings to everyone, than Gypsy Moth, where we didn't do mailings to everyone, than cannabis.
Yep.
So we don't adjust the standards presumably because there are some residents who are opposed. And what one has to keep in count and remember that there's actually a groundswell, as staff have told you, we get 2 or 3 inquiries a month. We have for a few years. So if that's 2 a month, that's 24, 25 a year. Assuming it wasn't 3, it was always 2. You go a couple of years of that, there is real demand for this service from real and normal residents who have, typically it's family challenges and want to find a way to accommodate.
Great. Thank you for that, Mr. CEO. And I agree totally with your answer. I know at the region, a budget of $1 billion a year, we pass policies. It's business as usual. Public meetings. If you want to address council, you're able to. So, and it's obviously the same as at this level. So I fully agree with that answer. Okay, anybody else have any other comments? Councillor Stewart.
Yes, thank you. Through you, Mr. Mayor. Before we get a staff recommendation report, I would like to be assured that we won't be getting anything like that before we have the results with the parking study. And then as Councillor Hahn asked for more information about what other municipalities are doing.
Yeah.
Thank you.
Okay, thank you. And I believe we've already had staff assurance on the second one. And Mr. CEO, as far as the parking study, that being in April, that should be well within the time frame?
Your worship, we're certainly happy to respect that. I just, at some point, someone has to say, like, we believe this parking study is going to be useful, and it was staff endorsed going forward with it. But I don't want to suggest it's a panacea that's going to cure all ills in the community, and that it's going to be so exhaustive that it touches every single topic. And like, I feel like we're building this thing up to be more than it can be, and I just throw that out as a cautionary.
Yes, I can appreciate that. I know I've talked to a couple of municipalities that have done recent parking studies, and I'll just leave it at that. That Pelham's is not out of line the way it is, and there are some that are lower. So it'll be an interesting study. Ms. Weens?
No, sorry, Mr. Mayor, I don't have anything further.
Okay, thank you very much. Again, on the subject of SDUs, any other comments or questions? And not seeing any, I shall turn to the clerk.
Through you, Mr. Mayor, thank you very much. That does bring us to the presentation of resolutions. I have a motion put forth by Councillor Stewart that Council receive Report 2021-0038 as it pertains to second dwelling unit policies and regulations, and that Committee direct planning staff to prepare the recommendation report on this topic for Council's consideration once all comments have been received. Seeing no discussion, Mr. Mayor, I'll call the vote, starting with Councillor Kaur.
Yes.
Councillor Olson.
Yes.
Councillor Stewart.
Yes.
Councillor Wink.
Yes.
Councillor Hahn.
Yes.
Councillor Hildebrandt.
Yes.
Mayor Junkin.
Yes.
And that motion carries. I have a motion put forth by Councillor Hahn that committee receive the written correspondence as listed on the agenda, and that committee receive the verbal presentations made by the public listed on the agenda, and that committee receive any emails, comments received during the public portion of the meeting at the clerks@pelham.ca email address. Seeing no discussion, I call for the vote with Councillor Olson.
Yes.
Councillor Stewart.
Yes.
Councillor Wink.
Yes.
Councillor Hahn.
Yes.
Councillor Hildebrandt.
Yes.
Councillor Kaur.
Yes.
Mayor Junkin.
Yes.
And that motion carries. Through you, Mr. Mayor, it is 7:28, and I have a motion put forth by Councillor Hildebrandt that the special meeting of the Committee of the Whole public meeting under the Planning Act be adjourned. Looking for any discussion?
Any discussion on the motion? Not seeing any. Madam Clerk?
Thank you, Mr. Mayor. I will call the vote with Councillor Stewart,
Yes.
Councillor Wink,
Yes.
Councillor Hahn,
Yes.
Councillor Hildebrandt,
Yes.
Councillor Kaur,
Yes.
Councillor Olson,
Yes.
Mayor Junkin.
Yes.
That motion carries. Mr. Mayor, you can gavel and adjourn the meeting.
Good evening, everyone. See you at the next meeting.
Good night, all.
Good night.